Hello, myself Sunil Ramakrishnan here, and here basically we are discussing about the 215 part, that is the formula part. And till now, basically, we have discussed lots of things like software companies, software nuclear companies, CRM, TCS, all software products, updations, digital banks connected with the power company connected with nuclear power company, then oxygen supply, basically yet supply from the roadmap of the oxygen power supply, creations of the brain cells and the CRM. In this, basically, the main thing basically we have not discussed. That is basically, for example, one person basically asked the question to the Bollywood that assume that basically he basically has read this. He basically has uh, read this in some book basically. That is in one day basically, whole world basically land is going to become unstable. Unstable means whole world basically building is going to fall. Each and every buildings are going to fall, roads are going to fall down, roads are going to become crack, mountains are going to fall down, lots of pools basically it's going to get blast. The or each and every dams basically in this world basically is going to fire, means going to blast due to some reason. How basically that we are going to discuss. For example, one of the power company got blast, one of the nuclear power company got blast, one of the um, land basically got blast. Land blast means become unstable basically. Unstable means each and every building basically is falling. Like this basically, there is one movie basically 2012 movie. There is one movie in that exact same basically is going to happen in this world. So that basically the Bollywood group basically told. So just imagine then basically what is going to happen to the near of the sea city basically. But mostly he told that this might happen basically. So what might be the reason? So that basically we are going to discuss. For example, one person basically is moving in the road. Suddenly, basically from one mobile, suddenly some connection happened, and he what the oxygen supply basically was taking, in that oxygen supply basically some other oxygen basically supply basically connected, and that basically connected to his brain, that connected to his brain, and his brain basically become unstable means he was moving left right, this basically has happened. So what actually was that? That was basically the oxygen power supply, which was actually passed to him by the nuclear power company and the energy company. That was basically hijacked by one mobile. It was hijacked by one mobile. But that mobile person basically don't know that his mobile was hijacked, and that person basically was too big to attached to his head. His mobile was used. So who can do this? By default, first the person who basically having the each and every blood cells information of that person. That is by default the blood company basically where he has given the blood. So from there basically they might have collected the blood, or they might have forcefully taken the blood of that particular person, because there are the world is basically very bad to damage any person's uh, to give trouble to any person basically. The people basically can do anything. So forcefully, basically, they taken the blood. How that basically we will is going to discuss practically only basically how basically they takes the bloods. So there are basically many ways basically. Then basically he told that like this he basically become unstable. He was moving left, he was moving right. Suddenly he basically fall down. Like this basically lots of things happened to him. Then basically he diagnosed the thing basically what actually happened, then basically he tracked that there was one mobile which actually connected to his oxygen power supply line, and that basically was hijacked. And here basically the oxygen power supply assumed that ONGC, for example, assume that that person basically which got unstable, that is basically from Vadodara city. So there are two companies basically who gives the oxygen supply to each and every people, that is ONGC and IPCL. So which was that oxygen power supply company basically, which was giving the oxygen power supply to that particular person, and that person's oxygen power supply basically was hijacked. In this hijack basically, without the IPCL and ONGC company basically, without their permission basically hijack will not happen. So they have given the permission. They have basically given the permission to that mobile group basically, so that his oxygen basically was hijacked, so that basically his oxygen can be hijacked. So like this they hijacked that oxygen, and they basically at last they done the damage to his head. So this is about the Vadodara city. That there are two company basically. That is one is the ONGC. Assume that ONGC basically some dangerous thing happened. Means there was basically one blast basically happened in Surat ONGC. There basically what might have happened, that their blast happened. There might have something might have happened, right? Something might have happened there basically, right? So here basically we are not talking about the ONGC is going to blast, IPSL is going to blast. We are not discussing that. So here basically we are discussing that the land basically suddenly got unstable of whole world basically. Mountain basically was for moving right side. The buildings basically the each and every tall buildings basically of 100 floor basically fall down. Like this each and every trees basically was falling down. Like this mountain basically got blast. Like big software, big nuclear power company, and sea basically got unstable. Sea unstable means each and every sea water basically came out from the sea boundary. Like this, if you assume that 100 200 country basically got into the sea water. Like this basically things happen. Basically this might happen basically. So what might be the reason basically this will happen? So what would be the reason? So here basically I'm just talking about the software industry basically. So what software industry might be doing the mistake that this will 100% happen, and due to that software on energy basically, how the whole world basically energy is going to suffer, because it's I'm just talking about the oxygen of the software industry basically. So what might be the happening? What would be that thing basically which will happen? Assume that uh, there is one person basically who is the owner of the Mars, MARS. Assume that the person basically which is staying in the Earth planet, he is the owner of the Mars, and suddenly basically his body got attacked. Suddenly basically his body got attacked by some group. Assume that that was one mobile only basically. Assume that that was one mobile only. Assume that that was one mobile only. Assume that that was one mobile only. Assume that it was Infosys. Assume that that was Infosys. Assume that that was Infosys. So here basically we are talking about that suddenly basically land got fall, each and every basically temple got blast, temple got start falling down, mountains basically start falling down. Each and every sea basically water came into the city, and hundreds of city basically got finished. So what would be that reason basically this happened? What would be that reason basically will happened? So what might be the reason basically? Satellite basically will leave the control. Satellite basically will never basically going to leave the control. Why? Because if satellite will basically leave the control, then basically the unstable universe will happen. Unstable universe means Earth planet will go this side, Mars will go that side, but never going to blast. Why? Because they are very far basically. The basically planets basically are staying very far basically. So that is never going to blast. If assume that both are attracting with each other, then also basically there are many reasons basically. There are many things basically which will never allow to get attract with each other and going to blast Mars and Earth planet. So this is basically never going to happen. This is basically never going to happen. So unstable basically reason this might not be basically because universe basically is very clear about the universe group says that we are basically perfectly created and nobody can basically pass data. Nobody basically can pass data without our permission. Nobody can pass data without our permission. So universe basically group says this, nobody can pass the data without our permission. So they are 100% correct that nobody in this world basically can pass data to universe without their permission. It's not possible, right? Because the data of the basically Earth planet is designed in certain basically diagram. So whatever data is going to be passed from the Earth planet, that is 100% going to be from the diagram only basically. Without diagram basically the Earth planet is not going to pass the data. Sorry, Earth planet object basically is not going to pass the data. So if you can't pass the data, then basically 100% the stable unstable thing is not going to happen from the satellite only. So how what basically is going to happen that Earth planet, each and every object basically got unstable. Unstable means building got crashed. Each and every 100 floor building basically got fallen down. 200 building basically got fallen down. 50 building basically got fallen down at time only basically. Entire city basically got finished just within seconds. So what would be that reason basically? This will happen. So what might be the reason? Because in India, basically, this is not possible. Because in India, this will never happen. Why? Because India basically is a God country basically, and God basically is saving the people and the each and every land basically. So basically, who created the Earth planet? They also basically can't do anything to Earth planet. The people who basically created the Earth planet, they also basically can't do anything to the Earth planet. Like this, basically, the India basically is telling that we are so powerful that basically Indian lots of scientists, the NASA group basically, the ISRO group basically, they are telling that India is very powerful, that nobody in this universe basically can do anything to the India land basically. So what might be that reason basically? Whole world will get unstable, but India country basically will never get unstable. So what might be the reason? There might be some reason, right? Without basically reason, nothing might happen. Without any reason basically nothing is going to happen. There might be some reason, right? That hundred country basically got wash out in the sea water. This basically might happen basically. This basically might happen. But here basically what software group basically is going to play the role. I will take one example of the best example of the software company basically up to what level this group basically have done the achievement. For example, one person is moving, assume he is basically in car. Assume that he is basically in two wheeler. He is moving in the road basically. Suddenly, basically, his oxygen power supply basically got attacked. His oxygen power supply basically got attacked. And in Vadodara, basically, if it's get attacked, that means one is the ONGC and another one is the IPCL. These two basically are the energy company basically who is supplying the oxygen power supply to each and every people basically. For example, one person basically head got damage. So these are two are basically responsible. One is the ONGC, one is the IPCL. Without their permission, nothing is going to happen. So for example, assume that one person basically head got damage. So these two groups are responsible. But which group basically, that is very difficult to track. That is basically very difficult to track. Whether it was ONGC or whether it was IPCL. Because you can't basically track the oxygen data, right? It's very difficult, right? But there are many ways basically you can track the oxygen power supply also. Basically, which oxygen power supply is getting passed by the which energy company. That is the ONGC and IPC. Here basically we are taking example the ONGC and IPCL. So assume that World Bank basically has given the subscription. Sorry, World Bank basically is the subscription plan group basically who says that who basically says that in this city basically these groups are going to handle this blood group. This energy company is going to handle that blood group. So same way basically World Bank basically have the data of World Bank basically have the data of which basically which energy company is going to handle which blood group. So basically assume that one person's head basically got damaged. So he basically might be having the blood group. So basically if he's not basically HIV by AIDS person, then basically 100% he will be having the blood group because HIV AIDS group basically don't have the don't when you check the blood cells of that particular person basically that time basically HIV AIDS people basically can't see the sorry their blood cells basically don't see the blood group. HIV AIDS people basically can't don't have the blood group basically. This is basically proved by the scientist NASA and ISRO. So NASA and ISRO basically says that if you don't your blood cells basically is not able to display the blood group, that means basically you are the HIV AIDS person. This is basically the Gola method basically you can say which few blood checking people basically says this. So here basically we are not talking that who is the blood cell whose blood cells is HIV AIDS blood cells whose blood cells basically is so whose blood cells is HIV AIDS. One person basically told that basically one person told that for example there are basically I will take one story basically. I will take one story. Assume that he was basically not powerful but a very small rich person. Sorry, very poor person. He basically got married in Mumbai. Just taking basically example, basically how dangerous energy company and power companies are. He basically got married in Mumbai. That girl basically assumed that that girl basically was HIV/AIDS, and that girl basically was very rich girl, and that poor boy basically was not rich. So here basically poor and rich basically the poor basically got one. Poor basically got one. One means they basically got married, done the marriage with cheating basically you can say. Like this basically that boy basically got married to one HIV AIDS. Suddenly basically after that some days basically he tested his blood. He basically tested his blood. Then basically he got the information that he is basically having the HIV AIDS. He is basically having the HIV AIDS. Then basically somebody basically the news agency basically are basically around the cities basically where basically each and every people basically is moving here and there, each and every information basically are kept by the certain groups. So they basically inform that girl basically that he basically is having he basically has tracked that he basically is having HIV/AIDS. So like this, basically, that girl basically ran away from the house and went to her house, to back to her house basically, where basically she was staying actually. But here the main thing was she basically came back and basically she basically done the she basically told that basically that person basically thought that basically he might not be having the HIV/AIDS. So he basically thought that I should basically check again the blood cells basically. Then basically again check the blood cell. That time basically the girl basically was connected with that person basically. That person basically the hospital basically and told that don't basically give him the correct report, give him the wrong report. So the, like this basically he got the blood group, and like this basically he told that basically he is not having the HIV/AIDS. So like this basically he was not having the HIV/AIDS. Like this he was told basically, but he was basically having the HIV/AIDS medicine. He was having the HIV/AIDS medicines because in HIV it's basically antibiotic of the each and every body parts basically gets damaged. But he was basically having the antibiotics of the HIV/AIDS. So here basically that is not the story. Here the story is we are talking about the oxygen power supply, right? So one basically is HIV/AIDS blood cells. That oxygen supply basically assume that that person is in Vadodara and he is getting the oxygen power supply from ONGC and IPCL. So these two are the oxygen power supply company for that particular person. Assume that that person is basically from Vadodara city. And then basically after some days, basically when he checked his sperm, basically that time basically the doctor told that basically have you done your nasbandi basically? Have you done your nasbandi? Then that person basically told no, basically I have not. Basically I have I am basically I don't have any child also. What? Yeah, I don't have any child also. Then basically he was shocked basically. Why basically your basically sperm has damage and it's basically done nasbandi also of your body parts. That also basically the laser nasbandi. New technology. So that it was basically newly introduced and he was that person basically was done start. He was basically started. So like this everything basically are made in China, made in India. Sorry, made in USA. So like this basically that person basically what nasbandi. And here the thing was basically here basically we are not talking about his persons basically got HIV/AIDS Nazbandi done by that girl basically. And then basically that girl basically left his house and then basically they got divorced also. After divorce basically that person basically tracked that he was basically having the Nazbandi. Then basically he was basically poor guy. What he can do? What basically that poor guy can do? Because it's a rich people world, right? Nobody can do anything. Rich people the world basically rich means money people world so paise walon ki duniya like this that person basically can't do anything like this basically suddenly after some days basically he was HIV/AIDS person and he was basically having the nasbandi also. So what basically is going to have in this life, then after some time basically he got died and his favorite color basically was brown color. So assume that here basically what we were talking about. Here basically we are not talking about the brown color. Here we are basically not talking about the red color. Here basically the thing is that person basically assume that the person basically was from Vadodara city. That person basically was from Vadodara city and he was basically getting the power supply from he was basically getting the oxygen power supply from IPCL and ONGC. These are two basically the energy company who was basically giving the energy power supply means oxygen power supply in his body basically whenever basically he's going to breathe These are those company basically ONGC and IPCL who are basically responsible if anything happens to his body parts, then this group are responsible. So that group basically was having that before that person basically was knowing that he basically was done Nasbandi by his first wife basically. His first wife basically, that IPCL and ONGC group basically got this information that he was basically having the Nasbandi. According to that, he was basically getting the oxygen power supply. That was the main thing basically. He was getting the power supply, sorry, the oxygen power supply according to his body parts basically. Assume basically his head was damaged and basically he was taking some medicines. After that, basically his head basically was perfectly fine. Then that medicine is there in the body, right? That medicine data basically IPCL and oxygen power supply is companies having. Oxygen basically power supply, that data basically that IPCL and oxygen power supply is having. But here basically what happened? Somebody, some group basically, software industry basically hijacked his oxygen power supply, and that time basically his head got damaged, and that was happened through mobile as well. So here, what are basically the thing was? Here basically we were discussing that hundreds of country basically got finished, and hundreds of country basically washed out in the sea water, and lots of mountain basically got crashed, lots of tree basically got crashed, and lots of building basically 100 floor building basically got crashed. Like thing basically this might happen in the earth planet. So what would be that reason basically that this will happen in earth planet? So what would the software industry is supposed to do for this problem basically? This is basically the biggest problem basically, we can say. And mostly basically this is going to happen one day. This is 100% going to happen one day. But what would be that reason basically? What would be that reason basically that this is going to happen? That basically, have you have heard about that mountain basically is moving left side, mountain is moving right side? Have you ever basically heard about this? Hundred basically countries basically washed into the sea water. Have you basically heard about this all this thing? No, basically. Hundred floor building basically is falling down. Have you ever heard about this? Tree basically got fall down, then the lava basically, the lava sand basically got blast, and basically at a second basically entire city basically got into the lava. Have you heard about this all this thing basically? So this might basically happen in this world, but when this is going to happen, that basically we are going to discuss in next video. That is the 216 number video. This is basically 215 number video. In 215 basically we are going to discuss this basically. Why basically the hundreds basically, what would be that reason basically that hundred country basically washed into the sea water, and mountain basically moved left side, right side, hundreds of floors of building basically fallen down. So what would be that reason that this is going to happen one day? So, what would be that reason that this is going to happen one day? That reason basically we are going to discuss tomorrow in next video. That is 216 number. This is 215 number. 1 5.